Hi, I'm Tim Masso here with Brian Govberg at WatchBox New York. Sometimes it's awkward to introduce a person who needs no introduction. In the world of Patek Philippe, John Reardon is a scholar, a collector, an auctioneer, and an entrepreneur. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so nice to be here, Tim. I'm a big fan, and I love what you're doing here at WatchBox, and in particular with this new series.
Well, very cool. We will have a chance to share our mutual admiration, but I got to ask you, you started in 1997 in the auction business, maybe an unanticipated career turn. You went straight to Sotheby's. At what point did you encounter Patek Philippe and begin to feel that buzz?
Wow. It all started when I was at Sotheby's. Of course, I was aware of Patek Philippe, but I wasn't planning on a future surrounded by the brand and everything that I think about and do. That was an unexpected byproduct, we'll say. But it was in 1997, cataloging some of my first auctions for Sotheby's, and I had trays of Rolex watches, and it was very easy to catalog at that time Rolex timepieces. It was just it was a very methodical. Frankly, it was very boring. Yet today, scholarship has gone on to a whole new levels with Rolex. I think it would be quite exciting to do today. But going back to the late 1990s, when I came across a Patek Philippe pocket watches that first caught my attention, I was just enamored by the movement, just looking with a loop at the movement and really educating the eye at what makes it special. It was so exciting for me. And then as I learned more about the history, I just knew I was in love. And that's when I was first bitten by the bug in 1997.
It wasn't actually long after that you joined Patek Philippe proper. How do you start that conversation? Did they recruit you, or did you find them?
Wow. It actually happened just a few blocks from where we're sitting here in Midtown, New York. I received a phone call while working at Sotheby's. It was my 4th year at Sotheby's, from a recruiter who claimed they worked for their client, the Henry Stern Watch Agency, aka Patek Philippe. First, I thought it was some friends playing a prank on me, because at that point I was all about all things Patek Philippe. And I never thought the brand would actually contact me, so I was positive it was a prank. So I spoke to the headhunter a few times, and then we had a secret meeting at a bar, very, very close by where we are. And that's when I knew it was real. And after 2 meetings with her is when I finally had the interview with Hank Edelman, and eventually Tanya Edwards, who's now my colleague at Collectibility. And I also met Larry Pettinelli at that point in time. I felt like I was trying to get into the CIA with this series of interviews, and it was a 6-month process until finally the dream came true. I was offered that job, and I resigned immediately from Sotheby's.
I think it's important to note that while you were with Patek, you were as familiar with the modern as you were with the past. And
yes.
So in 2008, you wrote Patek Philippe in America, which I think was one of the first scholarly books in the 2000s that had actually come out, not just about the brand, but actually specifically about Patek Philippe's history in the US. Was this a passion project, or how did this come to be?
I started collecting in the early years of eBay, Patek Philippe advertisements. And I think, like we all do today, it was so exciting back in the Wild West of eBay. You would put in, I would say, Patek Philippe ads, and then I'd do it in every different language, so I would be able to search the world for advertisements. And I soon found I had over 1,000 ads in my collection, which I still have to this day. And I had the pleasure and honor of showing my collection to no other than Philippe Stern. I made copies of everything so he could see what I had. He so generously shared copies of everything that the Patek Philippe had in their archives. My pile was like this, their pile was like this. So we realized there was a huge opportunity to tell a story that hasn't been told before, in particular from the advertisements. And thus, Patek Philippe in America was born. In discussing the project with him at that time, I wanted to make it about Patek Philippe globally, their marketing history globally. But it was requested that I kept it focused on America, being based in the American market. 400 pages later, the book came out in 2008, 1,500 copies, and it was really, really quite fun to do that. And then 2 books came after that.
And so the books that have come out since, are you adding chapters as time goes on and more information becomes available, or is it just like different areas of research that you're now putting into the
Great question. The book ends in 1989, which is such a pivotal year in Patek Philippe history. So I have not done an updated edition. I think it should be done, and hopefully it will be done in the future. But yeah, the book ends in 1989. And I think the more recent history of Patek Philippe is getting so interesting, and each chapter is being written every day that goes by. Yes.
You joined Christie's as the director of all watch sales, and so that did broaden your purview somewhat and your responsibilities. While you were at Christie's, managing many brands and eras, how did your perspective of the Patek brand change or evolve?
Wow. It's tough because when you work for an auction house, everything that you do is for the profit of the auction house. That's your job. I also always dreamed of being a scholar. So there's always the academic components. And sometimes those two things didn't intersect in the most fruitful way. So the relationship with Patek Philippe while I was at auction was difficult because you would sell what the market wanted. And during my second tour of duty in the auction world, especially at Christie's, the market wanted modern. So we were selling a lot of modern pieces that were current production, and people would buy something from a boutique and then they would try to sell it at auction. But my friends at Patek Philippe were watching this closely. They would rather see vintage watches. I mean, that's what's best for the brand. Vintage is vintage, but current production pieces with pieces that were recently sold, showing at auction is frowned upon today as it was a few years ago. So in answer to your question, it was difficult for me to balance those two worlds. And I think ultimately that conflict is what led me to what I do now, is that I'm absolutely so passionate about vintage. And even though the bar keeps moving for vintage, I have plenty of watches that I can focus on while being respectful to the traditional retail network. I'm not competing with modern watches in any way, shape, or form.
And that actually segues into what we're going to talk about on the table here today. But we need to talk about collectibility, which you started in 2019.
Yes.
What's fascinating to me is that it's obviously a passion project focused on vintage, but it's not just a vendor business model. You are also focused on scholarship and education. That's a bit more intriguing. Talk to me about how you lead with that.
Sure. And passion project, I think, is a very accurate way to describe how it was born in 2019. Through COVID, collectibility just became so much bigger than I ever imagined as the focus went online for learning and also for transactions. Things were absolutely crazy in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And my team keeps growing. It's very humble in size compared to your organization. But we're slowly growing and staying at the core that it is a passion project. Everything here, everything that I buy is a watch I'd personally want to have in my collection. In short, I don't know where collectibility goes next, but we're having so much fun doing what we're doing, which is educating about Patek Philippe with a particular focus on vintage.
Well, one of the things that I think that you've done a great job, is it's not just vintage that you're focusing on. I would say it's more non-modern, right?
Yes.
Like, because you do have a lot of pieces from even earlier mid-2000s that are long out of the collection, that are almost forgotten about, but still represent great value to the collector. And I think that that's one of the best things that I've seen you do, is bring to light beautiful watches that perhaps are a little bit older, but that do speak to a modern collector. They're just not aware of it. And then through education, you introduce a watch similar to the Ellipse on the table right here, which we'll get to talking about, where it's 37 millimeters in size, automatic, quintessential Patek in terms of the aesthetic, but not something that somebody, let's say, buying a modern Calatrava may even be thinking about, but at a price point which, again, makes amazing sense.
Yeah, I think you worded it better than I ever could. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is find the diamonds in the rough from the world of Patek Philippe going backward. I'm always interested in what's new every year, but I'm more interested in what's showing up at auction or showing up with other dealers or showing up with the public pieces from 20, 30, 40 years ago.
And I think those are becoming more relevant now as clients or collectors are looking for unique things where scarcity is important, and to be honest, when you go back in time, things were just more scarce.
Yes.
You didn't have as many collectors buying those particular items, or Patek was taking a shot on something and it wasn't mass produced. And so when you now have a worldwide audience and 20-year-olds buying vintage, odd-shaped items, you go back and you say, okay, I'm interested in a Gilbert Albert piece, but they don't exist, right? Like they're just that rare and that hard to find, and that special.
And I think people forget that the average annual production for Patek Philippe from the 1920s to the 1960s, on average, was 5,000 watches per year. It was very small.
That's insane.
And it wasn't until the year 2002 that we estimate Patek Philippe made its 1 millionth watch. Since then, production numbers have gone up. There was a spike after 1989 as the Patek Philippe factory was able to make more pieces. So I really love that pre-1989 period, and with a particular focus in the mid-20th century. Indeed, every piece is rare.
And it becomes even more so with time, because with time, watches become unique. The condition, the remaining accessories, the mechanical state. Non-modern watches are highly non-standard. This is the meat of your market: unusual, fun, illuminating watches that illustrate Patek's history with an emphasis on design. Let's start in the 1950s.
Sure, and here in front of me I have from 1951 a reference 725/2, J being for June for yellow gold. Now what I love about this particular piece is this is the reference that gave us the aesthetic of the 1518 perpetual chronograph later on. Of course, this is not a chronograph. It also gave us the aesthetic for that whole lineage of perpetual calendars, going from the 2497 through the 3448. So this aesthetic with the moon phase at 12 is just so part of Patek Philippe's DNA. And to hold it in your hands, it just makes history very, very real. And the price point of these is still very accessible. 1518s are, I mean, you're paying $600,000 or $700,000 to get started with a basic piece in yellow gold, but you can still find 725s for well under 200,000. And a year ago, I would be able to say well under 100,000. So it shows how even pocket watches are going through a little change in price points.
Now, do you find, sorry to interrupt, but do you find most of the collectors that are purchasing these items from you are carrying them on their person, or is it something that they're marveling at home? They have it and they're showing, let's say, friends, but it's not something that they're keeping on them?
That's a great question, because the resistance to pocket watches, people say to me all the time, John, what am I going to do with it? I'm never going to wear a pocket watch. But now I have two answers. People are starting to wear pocket watches. Occasionally. I mean, I wear one, if it's to a wedding or something, I'll wear it just for fun. But that's not why people are buying them. People are buying them to put on their desks for their own private enjoyment. And during the pandemic, that became very comfortable for people. They're like, all right, I'm not going out, so I might as well look at the pocket watches on my desk. And I think that's why we saw this growing insurgence and interest in pocket watches. For people who are nervous wearing a watch out in public, a pocket watch is something very private, and there's such a dislocation in value
between the two
that people are like, well, I'm going to buy a pocket watch because there's no way I could afford the wristwatch equivalent.
Now, what I also like about pocket watches is that they make a grand entrance. A wristwatch from that period is going to be small, maybe even too small for modern tastes. But when you pull a pocket watch out of your jacket, you command the room, even if it's just a $400 Illinois piece from the US that you bought on eBay. They have an enormous amount of presence and gravitas when they do finally appear. So now we have a watch that's almost not fish, it's neither fish nor fowl, but in 1955, jeweler Gilbert Albert joins Patek Philippe as a full-time designer, and this watch is a great example of his left field thinking in practice.
Yeah, and he was hired when he was quite young. He was in his early 20s, and Patek Philippe really wanted to push the envelope with part of their avant-garde designs, and they needed a designer. This is a pre-Genta era, we have to remind ourselves. And he made his name, Gilbert Albert made his name in 1959 when he won an important jewelry award in Switzerland. So Patek Philippe wanted to hire the best, and they brought him in, and he was soon in charge of the workshops on the aesthetic side. And he wanted to do something based in his passion, which was organically designed and inspired timepieces. So he came out with the Ricochet collection as we know it. Many of them look like they're inspired by like patterns we'd see on bark finish. This watch I absolutely love. It's a reference 788 because it's inspired by coral. So it's more fish than fowl because it has this undersea appeal to it. And looking closely, it almost looks like a brain coral. And these were not the best sellers at the time. Talking to some, like Hank Edelman, who was traveling in the U.S. selling these during that time period, he said these weren't flying off the shelves in any way, shape, or form.
At the time, they would show them in a briefcase. They would bring it to your store and they would say, "Are you interested in this?"
They would open up the case, and these would be the ones that would be going home with him. They would not be sold, sadly. But like all things Patek Philippe, there's this ebb and flow. And now they're unbelievably desirable because not many were made. It was only between 1961 and 1968 that the Ricochet collection was out. So it's so much fun to have one of these here.
And if you look at the Gilbert Albert wristwatches like 3412, 3422, 3424, the market has discovered those. Those are not quite a secret.
Yes.
This, however, is less commonly seen. And there are two versions. There's the version that is portable, and then a strap-clad version as well.
Yes. The strap versions are highly debatable at the moment, whether or not they were originally made by Patek Philippe. I know because
I wondered. I don't even know.
Because I bought one and it had PPC hallmarks on the strap attachments, and it wouldn't be archived. It wasn't archived by Patek Philippe, and I know from the person I bought it from that she had it done in the 1960s by Patek Philippe. So I still don't have an absolute definitive answer on the wristwatch versions, but I think it's true between you and me.
Could it be like a retrofit, the way competition calibers were later put into cases?
I think the reality is if you bought a watch like that, or in this case, her husband bought it originally, she wanted to have something that reminded her of her late husband. She brought it to a Patek Philippe retailer. They sent it to Geneva, and this is in the 60s. They added the
These are the types of things that you could do at the time. No different than up until the middle of the 2000s, you could change a dial during service.
It's like the classic 3970, 5004 dials.
Exactly. And so, but
swapping,
like at the time, I mean, they were producing objects. I mean, you could purchase private label pocket watches at one point, right? Where, where you have Tiffany pocket watches that don't feature Patek Philippe on the dial. It's really just, you open the back and see the movement. So I think
when you're selling 5,000 watches per year, you're going to do everything for each of those 5,000 clients. And they were small enough that they were able to do that. And they were probably really happy they actually sold that watch too.
And it's funny because the two watches right here are both sort of objet d'art, but they're hard to classify horologically. This one is the product of a renowned designer. This one actually has many fathers because it started life as a coin.
this is wild.
Isn't that great? Can you feel it in your hands? I mean, this is what a coin watch feels like when it's been untouched, unpolished, and sitting in a drawer. And I found this from a coin dealer, of all people. He didn't know.
Oh, so you picked this up as a coin?
No, I wish I did.
I was going to say.
No, the gentleman who bought it, this was born in 1963.
I'll let you show it off.
It was born in 63. He bought it in 1981 as a pristine $20 gold piece. And I could only imagine when he took it in his hands, and one day, he told me the story, he found the little rectangle, which I'm even struggling to find right now.
It's seamlessly cut
I
to the
couldn't
point
believe
that it's
how
hard to
good a
find.
job they did.
Like, it's seamless. It's almost hidden.
I'm going to cheat.
I found it for a second and then I handed it off.
Oh, it's right there. Yeah,
And the thing is, no two coin watches open the same way, so you always have to relearn when you find one.
There we go. Wow.
So he told me when he first opened it, his heart melted because not only does it say Patek Philippe on the dial, it also says Tiffany and Company.
Oh.
So it's a double signed reference, 803. And these were made by Patek Philippe since 1927. So they're very early. In fact, the first coin watch sold by Patek Philippe went to no other than Henry Graves Jr., which is a really cool side note. Graves being the greatest Patek Philippe collector of all time. And you can just imagine Graves when he lifted up the dial. I mean, this isn't something you normally keep in your pocket, but it's kind of a novelty you could show.
No, but what's magnificent about it is first that it exists at all because the machining tolerances are insane. But second, that from I guess about the 50s through the 80s, these were regular offerings at Patek, the 801, the 802, the 803. This was not like a one-off novelty. They actually had these available on a going basis.
Even when I worked there, we had two of them in the vault up at or the Henry Stern Agency. One of them, we opened it up, I'll never forget. It was set in the bezel. Inside, diamonds, rubies, and a skeletonized movement.
Oh, wow.
It failed to sell. No one wanted it. And this is only going back 20 years ago. Today, if that watch showed up on the market, I think it could bring $100,000 quite
Ironically,
easily.
like you see all these different objects that they were making at the time, and we're going to see a special one in a little bit, but I think that there was less demand for these than there even is now. Meaning that there's tremendous demand now. Like if the brand was producing things like this in today's era, I think that there would be a big market for them.
And that's the dislocation. When I look at pocket watches, I always think of that word, is that there's, the supply is incredibly low. We only know of 48 of these made by Patek Philippe in existence today. They probably made, well, we know they've made more, between 100 and 200. Many of them were probably melted down, I can only imagine.
Or sitting in coin collections unannounced.
Exactly. I think we should all go to coin shows.
Numismatics is suddenly fun. But what else is cool is, and I believe it's a 9 lean Piguet movement in there, that a movement can be that thin at all. And I believe that movement's only 1.75 millimeters thick. That's what it takes to get a movement inside a coin.
And that is the story of miniaturization. People equate it with the quartz revolution, but it actually goes back much, much earlier. And the first coin watches, and this is very important to know, they weren't all made in-house by Patek Philippe. There was a company named Goyot. I think it's the key mark that you'll see inside. The secret key mark indicates Goyot was the one who made the case. And sure enough, 2 coins were needed to make each coin watch. And Goyot is the one that did that for that whole 50-year period. You'll see these from Piaget. I just bought one from Rolex. The only Rolex I own is a coin watch, and I absolutely love it.
AP made them.
Audemars Piguet made them. There's Vacheron coin watches. I just came across the Van Cleef and Arpels coin watch from the 20s. So this wasn't exclusive to Patek Philippe. The dial being signed Patek Philippe, the finish of the movement being from Patek Philippe is why I would pay a premium.
But it shows you that during the era that there was this shared knowledge between companies, less so than today, where being able to produce something entirely in-house is viewed by the market as being very important.
And today, everything is about the vertical production, but the Swiss industry was built on buying parts from friends in the mountains.
Exactly.
And I think that's still a relatively untold part of the Swiss industry.
And before the acquisition of Atelier Reardon, case making at Patek Philippe was not really a thing.
That's true. And it's no coincidence that Reardon is now, their building is now the Patek Philippe Museum, which is really cool when you're walking through the hallowed halls of the museum, realizing that so many of these amazing bracelets and cases were made in that building.
So this is probably the most famous Patek Philippe case design of certainly the 1960s, maybe the second half of the 20th century. What is it you love about the 3448? Because I'm drawn to the lugs. I mean, they look sharp enough to draw blood.
Oh, that's very well said. The first thing I look at is when you're looking at the design vocabulary going back to 1939, 1940, is clearly seen on this watch from 1971. And this 3448 is 10 years into the 3448 production, which started in 1961. Over its 20-year line history, exactly 586 pieces were made. And I think it is one of the most attractive vintage timepieces that you could wear today.
And big.
And a really nice size, 37.5 millimeters.
And you can see the design cues on the current production pieces, particularly the 5236 digital perpetual.
That's true. I never thought of that.
That it has a very, very similar lug and case profile. And so you can see that a watch produced then is as relevant then as it is today, and that the brand really does go back and draw from its history when creating the new.
And I love when they take design cues from the past. It just really speaks to me. And whenever I pick up a 3448, or for that matter, a 1518, when I'm lucky enough to have one, or a 2499, the first thing I look at is the moon phase under high magnification, because you could see in the imperfections its beauty. I mean, these were handmade enamel moon phase discs, and they just really have so much charm. And I think although this has an industrial look for a watch from the 1970s, when you look at the moon phases, that's just where the heart of it is.
The artisanal nature comes out.
And that's why it's the perfectly balanced watch. aesthetically and historically.
But I think one of the things that they do exceptionally well, whereas other brands will reissue a watch and do their best to reissue it in its entirety, they will take design cues from older references that are a nod sort of to those that know about it, but that most collectors wouldn't even realize that it's being drawn from. And they may even take a design cue from 2 or 3 references, but it's not just a complete reinterpretation of the watch. They're drawing the best of different things and creating new. And I think that that's so important that they do relative to some other brands that will just, sort of
it's
the
tribute to Polaris, the tribute to Diver XXY.
Well, I didn't want to give specific examples, but
that's
yes.
fine. It's the kind of thing where, like with the 5235 back in 2011 when they first showed that design, it was the rebirth of the angular bezel and the razor-sharp lugs of the 3448, but it was also a completely unprecedented dial.
Yes, it reminds me also of the 5396. That came out with the sector dial. But then they really did a nod to the 3448 when they removed the sector and just made almost an identical look. Yet it was annual calendar. So I thought it was heresy when I first saw the watch. I've learned to fall in love with that series of 5396s.
But I almost think that they were going like that they were designing that watch for a younger audience.
Yes.
At a time in which the younger audience wasn't quite there yet. And so they transitioned it to this dial, and that they're like, okay, like maybe they weren't ready for a sector dial just yet. And
they didn't know what a sector dial was.
Correct.
I remember
and
trying to
back.
explain it to people at that point.
And it's an incredible piece, but even though technically they stem from exactly the same time period, this 3448 could not be more different than this 3587. I mean, you got to tell me, where did this monster come from?
Wow, this is one I recently acquired, and monster is the right word. You need a forklift to pick this up. And it's amazing to think these are both from 1971. Now let's go back to the retail prices, which is always fun. 1971 was right just before I was born. You could have picked this up for just over 1,000 Swiss francs. But this beast, 2,200 Swiss francs, which was a lot of money in 1971. I mean, just comparing to 24.99.
And for quartz.
Yeah, and for quartz. So now you see the disconnect in the value they are today. I mean, these are less than $30,000 on the market today. And Beta 21s to me represent a real opportunity to own a bit of history and to have a statement watch. I mean, when we put that on your wrist, you know it's there, and everyone else does too.
And think about how big it was for the time. I mean, there was nothing quite like it.
This was 42 millimeters. This was 42 millimeters in an era where people didn't even know what that size was.
And the bracelet is fully integrated, so this is really all of a piece. It has a massive heft to it, solid case back, and I mean, let's just be perfectly honest. This is probably the most soulful of quartz watches because the Beta 21 has a voice. You can hear it. It's almost like an Accutron.
You could feel it like vibrating on your wrist too. It's just one of the pleasures. It's a watch that makes a statement all day long.
And rare.
Yeah, and we've only seen a few hundred of these resurface. Sadly, a lot of these cases were melted down because there's just so much gold. But today, when we find one with a dial that has its original lume, and look at that, the green, you can see the green lume and the blue dial. It just has this charm and style. And these capture my heart. They're not the easiest watch for upkeep. For anyone that has a Beta 21, you understand what I'm talking about.
This predated the Astron.
What year did that come out?
The Beta development did predate the Astron.
Correct.
The Beta 1, the Beta 2 predated the Beta 21, but the Beta 21 was the first one on the market.
Got it.
And Patek Philippe started marketing their Beta 21s in 1969, but along with that whole group. So the movements are identical, but of course let's take a look.
We'll take that case back off.
So I removed the battery because after I acquired it, I'm always worried about these batteries leaking. So that's why you see no power in this.
And it would have been a mercury cell battery initially.
Yes. Now you use a 357 size battery, which something I'm going to pick up in the city while I'm here today, because I want to get this one running again.
But you can see from top to bottom, every single millimeter is used to house this movement. It's a monster by itself. It is by itself almost the size of this 3604 next to it.
That's a great point. And they call it the matchbox movement because it looks like one. And it's this giant rectangular movement.
The only thing that is strange is that because there was a consortium to design this, or at least a consortium sponsoring it, you get very little branding on each one. So it's the same movement from brand to brand.
Yeah, it says Patek Philippe, oh so small. And then they used movement numbers that are even tinier. I mean, you need a very, very strong loop to get the movement number to order your extract. It's a challenge.
And I mean, let's face it, the movement itself is rare. What, 7,000, 7,200 Beta 21s total?
Yes, of all brands, yes.
Now, again, we are talking about watches that are broadly related, but really only the era links them together closely. Tell me a little bit about this extraordinary 3604.
Sure. The 3604 is just starting to get some love. Mm-hmm. And it's important to note that the Beta 21s, or the 3597s and 87s, were purposely chosen to use the golden circle shape. We'll talk about the ellipse later, but this is the golden circle, which is different. And people often confuse the two. But the 3604 is the classic automatic golden circle. And this is, in fact, the second largest vintage Patek Philippe in terms of size. It was in regular production up until, well, into the 1990s.
37 millimeter.
37 millimeters, exact. The Beta 21 at 42, that has the first prize in terms of size. But to have an automatic that was such a large piece, we're not talking about Nautilus now too, but it was just something that was really unheard of at that time. It was a thick watch for the era. And today, it just really fits the modern watch on, it fits the modern wrist on a man or a woman. A beautiful, beautiful size.
I mean, I'm a big fan. And so, I mean, you're wearing a 37, 38, which smaller size ellipse. Mm-hmm. But I mean, again, for me, just pretty much the perfect size. I just picked up one myself. But I think that you're going to see clients moving back towards these watches and these cases, just given just how many different variations there are. And the relative value that you get with the watch.
I'll also say this, that watch is part of sort of a running theme on this table, where we've got a Patek caliber in the coin watch, we've got a Beta 21 in the 3587, and we've got a JLC base in that 3604.
It's fantastic.
The 3604's base, Patek called it the 28255, is the JLC 920 Abauche, which you'll also find in the original Royal Oak. You'll find it in the original Nautilus 3700. You'll find it in the Vacheron 222. It's funny that though this is a dress watch, that movement made its name in sports watches during the era. And it's a sign that you can have wonderful, historically important watches without this modern stigma of a customer caliber.
I could never word it like you just did, but those were beautiful words. So, absolutely. I think the fact that this has the same caliber as the Nautilus and the Royal Oak, among the others, I think this is an important footnote in history. And this is before the era of display backs. So people weren't talking about the movements, they were talking about the function. The fact that it's automatic with date. And that was the message from Patek Philippe at that time. But I love how scholarship has evolved to such a high level that people are comparing and contrasting between the brands during each of these eras. It's a great thing.
And look at everything that's going on this dial. Sigma dial, hobnail dial, and an automatic that does not say automatic.
Yes, just so refreshing. When I see automatic on a dial, I'm never quite so happy. But we discussed earlier before filming is Patek Philippe proudly put quartz on the dial, written in script, in the 1970s, whenever there was a quartz movement. And that tradition went all the way up into the 1990s. Not all references, but many. So you could buy a quartz Calatrava, and it says quartz right on the dial, and that's something to be proud of.
Ironically, the ones that don't say quartz actually do quite well because
they don't say quartz.
They don't say quartz. But so we spoke about this sort of being a diamond in the rough and how you've searched for those over the years. But something that I really wanted to know coming into this discussion is what have been some of your biggest discoveries is the wrong word, but like you're like, oh my God type discoveries where you've had an opportunity to see a watch that maybe the world hadn't quite seen yet?
That is such a great question and such a difficult question on one. Many of the best discoveries that I made at auction, some would go shared publicly at auction. So those we could talk about. Some went to private sales. So private sales are something the auction houses still do. They get a great piece and they park it with a wonderful collector with hopes that they'll get it back for auction someday. And that's something that I do too. A lot of the greatest pieces don't show up publicly. One of the greatest pieces that just comes to mind that has not shown up in the market, one of the greatest pieces that has not shown up in the market is the James Ward Packard Patek Philippe walking stick. Now, this particular piece was discovered by Stacy Perman, who is the author of A Grand Complication. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. It tells the story of Graves and Packard and their chase to find and to own the most complicated watch ever made. So it is a Patek Philippe story. In her research, she chased down every living descendant of James Ward Packard and Henry Graves. And with one of the descendants of James Ward Packard, of Packard Automobiles, she discovered that he had two Patek Philippes left that never left the family. One, this is from the 1920s, is a Patek Philippe ring. I believe it was in yellow gold. It said made especially for James Ward Packard on the back. Now that piece captured my heart, but the one that really just, to my day, it's like the piece that I would love to own. And probably the last thing I need is a Patek Philippe walking stick. Maybe in a few years I might need one, but was a Patek Philippe walking stick with an ivory cap that was removed that showed a silver coin edge decorated Patek Philippe movement that was wound and set from the top of the cane.
Wow. Which
is just a brilliant feature that Packard specifically requested. And apparently, Packard, who's an avid walker in his hometown of Warren, Ohio, would walk around the little park every day with his walking stick. And when I saw it, I could see he truly did wear this. Sorry, he truly used this quite often. That to me is like just one of those discoveries that just captures my heart. Now, we'll have a short list of the treasures that we're looking for and hoping to find.
So if you could dream up a watch based on what you know of the past, what you know of the present, and what you would want to see made, what would that watch be?
Now, in the past, I've answered that differently because our tastes change and evolve. And my dream watch today, picture the dial of 5212 in steel, which is just so cool. I love what they did with that watch. I'd love to see a different interpretation of that on a perpetual calendar. If you put that on a 5140 with that same aesthetic, with the hand design, that would be such an oddball watch that I would need to own it. That would be the current production watch. That
would be an interesting approach.
I would line up for. And I know that's a weird answer, but...
No, but it's a good answer, though. And actually, it's good we talked about the Henry Graves, or was it James Ward Packard walking stick. This is another implement of time that is not, strictly speaking, a watch. And I think along with the Packard walking stick, we need to discuss exactly what's in this box. I'm going to give you the privilege of unboxing for our cameras.
Thank you. I'm going to give some hints. So for those watching this can guess what's inside that box before we move forward. It was made in 1981. There's less than 10 examples known. There was one of the 10 has diamonds on the dial, but this is the only one known that has diamonds on the case. It's a functional object. It tells time. It's quartz, and it's not something that you're going to see every day. And we have one here of the original box, which I just acquired, so it'll be a fun reveal.
If you want to look sharp with your Patek, but you don't want to wear it, this is how you do it.
I'll face the camera for the reveal.
Pun fully intended.
That was good. Here we have a Patek Philippe Ellipse letter opener.
I'm even prepped for you.
All right. I've actually never used it.
It's the maiden voyage here, right here at WatchBox.
Let's see if it actually can
open a letter.
Open a letter. And if I can get the Patek Philippe and the WatchBox logo at the same time, it'd be good. My hands are shaking
in anticipation, right?
I think this is going to work. So here we go. Look at that. We had a clean cut.
Breaking the Geneva seal.
Yeah, exactly.
This is how you need to open up the watches now.
Yeah, right?
I was going to say they need a scissors, but I think they've made a scissors
That
before.
should be how you unseal a Patek Philippe.
This is true. We need the scissors. Well, I'll let you take a look at what's inside of that envelope, but Oh, yeah.
It's empty, no
It's empty.
surprises.
So what's so incredible about this is its heftiness, but the dial. These blued gold dials are exquisite when they're on their own, and they just have nothing but the blued dial, like we see on the 3738 I'm wearing now. But when you see the engraving of the gold dial, I mean, it's just absolutely exquisite. So this is the art of the engraver, the art of the gem setter, the art of the watchmaker, although it's quartz. And these were just made as objets, typically for royalty. This was bought at the Geneva boutique, someone that just wanted to have a bit of fun. And it's just, I've never owned one before, and it's a pleasure to reveal it with you today.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. This is the thing that the designer of the Patek Philippe sculpture had in mind. He wanted this feeling. He didn't quite hit his target, but he wanted this gilded, Baroque, overly ornate, massively embellished kind of look that actually manages to pull off a rare win for the more is more philosophy. The guy who designed the sculpture really meant to do this.
I think that the Ellipse lends itself so well to having artisanal aspects. And because the case itself is simple but also unique. And so you see that here with the engraving, you see it with some of the other modern era pieces that are made. And with regards to like, what would I want to see the brand doing today? And I'd spoken to you about this a little bit earlier, and they've actually done them in the past, was stone dial pieces. And I think that,
so
that
cool.
it's something that was done. It went away for a while, but it's now back, right? And so I think the Ellipse acting as the canvas for a lapis dial or malachite or onyx lends itself to both being a simple and exceptional watch at the same time. And I just think that it would completely reinvent and revitalize the entire series. And not only that, but so many collectors are focused on the here and the now and the modern. But I think that then rejuvenates the past. And so you would then have more collectors going backwards in time saying, oh my God, like look at the Ellipse, and then even discovering things like this and discovering watches from the past that they weren't even thinking about.
In the 70s and 80s, there were so many different dial variants of the Ellipse, and I couldn't agree more if they brought back some of the stone dials.
And I have to say, it was my great regret that the 50th anniversary of the Ellipse came and went without any real commemoration. So I want to just sort of chart the changes between the Ellipses we have on the table. We've got a 5738, which came out in 2008 for the 40th anniversary of the Ellipse, but there's nothing overtly ornate or commemorative about it. Now, if we take this letter opener, now we're reminded that historically the Ellipse has had not only a golden aspect ratio to its case, but also literally solid gold dials. And you see that finished in, well, we'll call it Baroque fashion here. But with the 2021 5738 51G, we got what that 50th anniversary Ellipse should have been, and it continues the engraved dial motif of the opener in a wrist format. It's enamel, it's engraved, it's solid gold, it's unbelievable.
And the Ellipse is a canvas, just asking for, and this is to your point, to showcase some of the rare handicrafts. We've seen miniature enameling, but these engraved pieces, to me, are just so beautiful. It's understated, but in a big way.
Yeah, the Ellipse letter opener, I called that Baroque. Well, the /51G is Rococo. It's the Baroque of Baroque. And frankly, it's still technically interesting. It has that great 240 micro rotor, which has always been the selection for the more upscale Patek automatics, which I love to see. But again, no one's talking about this watch. Its buzz level on the internet is exactly zero.
I think that it's, I think that it's just construed as a very dressy watch. And as times sort of changed and you had less opportunity to wear it and you almost viewed it as not really being casual, you were like, okay, well, is that going to be the direction that I go in, or should I go with something else? And I think that creating almost a casual Ellipse, no different than what they've done with the entire Calatrava series, right? Like, they re-energized the Calatravas with the 6119 or the 5226, and they've made these sort of casual dress watches where you can wear them all the time. And this is the one line where I think that it's ripe for that now.
I think a steel ellipse in current production would be quite fun.
Would be
We've only done it once before with the 3580
Yeah.
in steel, but for them to bring back the Ellipse as a core model, it's less than 1% of their production today.
I was waiting for you to bring that
I think
tidbit
it's
out.
going to happen, but we'll see.
This is unbelievable stuff, and I know that this is a sampling of what you can find on Collectibility, but I'm wondering, the most collectible John Reardon watches are the ones you own personally. Give us a little bit of a profile of what's interesting for you to collect right now.
I think we're going to have to do another video of my collection
Oh, boy.
and another time. I don't share publicly a lot of my pieces. Each of them are like very personal to me. They're not extraordinarily valuable, but they all have some very important personal connections in some way. I have 2 pieces with cases made by Mr. Hagman, which are near and dear to my heart. I have a Tiffany Movado that was gifted by Henry Graves to his grandson, which is from late 1940s. I think that's my prize of my personal collection. Of course, I have a few Ellipse watches, which I occasionally wear. And interestingly, the most prized watch in my collection from like emotional point of view is my reference 5064A. And that's a quartz aquanaut, and as you know. And it's because it was the first Patek Philippe that I ever bought while working for Patek Philippe, and it was literally the only one I could afford. And I wear that watch more than anything else. And the fact that that's almost 20 years old now just blows my mind, that this little 5064A has been in my life that long. And
That's awesome.
It's just
Have
fun.
you changed the strap colors?
I have, and I just wear black on there, but I have other strap colors, but I haven't dared to do that. But
So you're definitely going to want to check out Collectibility. John, where can we find you on social media?
sure, on YouTube, we have the Collectibility channel. I believe I have as many views per year that you have in an hour. So please, please like and subscribe on the Collectibility channel. Also, we're on Instagram at Collectibility LLC, and the site is collectibility.com. We also have a monthly podcast feature, which is still, I'd say, relatively undiscovered, but I just recorded my most recent podcast, and it drops the last day of every month.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been an
Thank you
absolute
so
thrill.
much. Absolute
you.
pleasure. Thank you so much, Brian.